This is a manuscript that is originally from Egypt, but is now in the Archduke Rainer collection of the Austrian National Museum in Vienna. It dates back to 643, just 1 year after Amr ibn al-As's takeover of Egypt. It is one of the oldest Arabic texts on papyrus we have. It is written in an early Hijazi Proto-Kufic script, which is like the great forefather of the modern Arabic script, but with certain later traits too in the script that makes it look a little bit more like a later Arabic text too. And I will go back to that later. But it is not only Arabic text, as this manuscript has both Arabic and Greek text, made by 2 different scribes, though from the same date. A Christian scribe was made the Greek text, as you can see with the crosses, and you will also later see that he refers to himself as a deacon. And the second scribe, the one that has written in Arabic, is most probably a Muslim Arab, due to his name Ibn Haridu. Both the Greek text and the Arabic text are regarding tributary payments from the local Egyptians to the Arab conquerors. And the Greek text is as follows, written by me, Gian, notary and deacon, on the 30th of the month of Paramuti, of the first indiction. God, in the name of God, I, Emir Abdallah, to you, Christophoros and Theodorakios, intendants of Heracleopolis, for the maintenance of the Saracens who are with me. I took from you at Heracleopolis 65 sheep, I repeat, 65 and no more, and as an acknowledgement of this fact, we have made the present confirmation. Document concerning the delivery of sheep to the Magarites and other people who arrived as a down payment of the taxes of the first indiction. So this is the Greek text on this manuscript. But now let us look at the Arabic text on this manuscript. In the name of God, the compassionate, the merciful, this is what Abdullah, son of Jabir, and his followers have taken with regards to slaughter from Heracleopolis, from a representative of Theodorakios, the younger son of Apakyrus, and from a representative of Christophoros, the eldest son of Apakyrus, 50 sheep as slaughter and 15 other sheep. He gave them for slaughter for the crew of his vessels, as well as his cavalry squadrons and his heavy infantry in the month of Jumada al-Ula in the year 22. So Ibn Hadidu has wrote. Now I'm going to discuss both the content of this manuscript as well as a little bit about the dating of this manuscript, because it is also quite interesting to discuss. Now we begin with the translation of the Greek text. In it they mention the Margarites, and the Margarites are the Muhajirun, which are the people that emigrated together with Muhammad when he fled from Mecca to Medina. And this manuscript is actually one of the earliest sources we have that confirms the emigration narrative in a classical historic narrative about Muhammad emigrating from Mecca to Medina by mentioning the circle around him that did emigrate from Mecca to Medina. It is just one singular term used in this manuscript, but that term alone reveals at least that part of the narrative being confirmed by this manuscript. Saracens, by the way, in the Greek text are Arabs. It's just a different term for them, which actually has a rather interesting history, which I might go into in a future video. Now, turning to the Arabic text. Here we see the mention of heavy infantry, thukala, which kind of points towards the fact that the Arabs that conquered Egypt were well armored and not a bunch of lightly armored light infantry, as is sometimes a wrong historic stereotype about Arab armies historically, and especially the early Arab armies. They were not armies of light infantry. Rather, they were well-equipped armies with well-armored soldiers that functioned as heavy infantry backed up with very heavy cavalry. And these armies would also be made up of voluntary soldiers and not of forced conscripts either. Though that fact is outside of this manuscript. But the manuscript still mentions heavy infantry, that is to say, well-equipped, well-armored infantry. And also, to give some further context, this is the sort of infantry that went into combat against the Eastern Roman Empire and had managed to beat the soldiers of the Eastern Roman Empire and taken over Egypt. And the Eastern Roman Empire had lots of heavy infantry as well as very heavily armored cavalry too. And thus you needed to be heavily armored too in order to fight this as well. Both texts, both the Greek text and the Arabic text, speak about a payment to the soldiers paid in food. This is a payment of jizya, the Islamic poll tax, and like a lot of early taxation systems in the pre-modern world, it was not always paid in metal money, but could also be paid in other ways, by services or in other goods. And in this case, it is paid in sheep for slaughter, to feed the soldiers, for the maintenance of the soldiers that had recently conquered Egypt. And speaking about conquering Egypt, this manuscript is early evidence of the conquest of Egypt and of the history surrounding it, because the Emir Abdullah here is none other than the Abdullah bin Jabir, who was the commander of the expeditionary forces sent to Upper Egypt in 641 to 643, and was served under Amr ibn al-As and his command. The existence of this manuscript mentioning Abdullah bin Jabir's name makes this manuscript evidence for at least this part of the classical Arabic historical narrative regarding the conquest of Egypt, and it also fits in the correct time for it as well. Speaking about time, this manuscript is also the first documented example of Arabic used in Egypt, and it is also an early administratorial text in Arabic, though it still contains also Greek text, and it would not be until the Caliph Abd al-Malik ibn Marwan that Arabic would become the sole administratorial language. And before him, it was still mostly Greek that was used in administratorial texts. So this very old text still containing Greek is actually not an uncommon feature of early texts that were connected to the administration of the caliphal domain. Also, notice in these texts that they also contain a great amount of contact with local leaders and local leadership, with Theodorakius and Christophorus being the sons of Father Kyros mentioned here, as local leaders of the Christian community. And it is important to know that there was a great amount of contact between local leadership and the newly arrived Arabs. And if you look at the Greek text, it is quite clear that it states that they took only 65 sheep and no more, clarifying that they did not overstep any bounds or previous agreements that are implied in these texts. And the texts are made as a confirmation of this fact. We have made the present confirmation. So while it is still a tributary arrangement between the local Christian subjects and the Arabs that had arrived and taken over Egypt, it is not a very heavy-handed one, which oversteps certain agreed upon bounds. And this manuscript was made as an acknowledgement and confirmation of still staying within the bounds. And trying to stay within the bounds, or appearing as trying to stay within the bounds, was actually pretty important to do. Because the fact that needs to be considered is that the Arab conquerors were few in number in comparison to the local population, to the local subjects of Egypt that they had recently conquered. And thus, they were forced to actually respect local leadership and the local population's wishes and limits and bounds, at least to a certain extent. Because having to put down rebellions could have cost them the control of the area. And thus the pragmatic way to keep control over Egypt was to not be too taxing and to stay within certain bounds and to make clear that you were staying within certain bounds. And this early manuscript shows this pragmatic policy of trying to stay within certain bounds, or at least trying to appear as staying within certain bounds. And speaking about being an early manuscript showing this, I want to discuss the date of this manuscript and how we can know that this manuscript is actually from this period, from this time. Now, from what I've heard of a colleague of mine, they have carbon dated this manuscript from being from this period. But let's assume that we didn't have a carbon dating of this manuscript, that we had to go on other indications of the time of this manuscript, from which time it is from. Well, firstly, you have the dates mentioned in the two texts themselves. In the Arabic text, there is an unspecified day in the month of Jumada the 1st of the year 22. And in the Greek text and in the Coptic calendar, it is the 30th of Parmuti, the first indiction, corresponding with the 25th of April 643 in the Julian calendar, which corresponds also with Jumada the 1st in the Hijri calendar. So you have a correspondence between both of these texts, at least implying that they were made at around the same time both, or at a time very close to each other. And the time ought to be the stated time of this date of the 25th of April 643, when you convert it into the Julian calendar. So we are not talking about two widely different in time texts, probably. And they also discuss the same subject as well, which further makes it probable that both of these texts are from around the same date. You also have the fact that the manuscript is written in both Greek and Arabic. And this is typical for early Arabic administratorial texts, that they are not only written in Arabic, but they also have texts in Greek too on them, either as translations or as continuations on the subject matter discussed in the administratorial texts, as in this case. And the fact that two languages are present in this administratorial text indicates a very early date for it, an early date that is before the time of Abd al-Malik ibn Marwan, who ordered that all the administratorial texts would be written only in Arabic. Also, the manuscript is in papyrus, which was the standard writing material of the 7th century in the Middle East, paper not being introduced and becoming the standard until the 8th century. So, the material used for the manuscript is another indication of this manuscript actually being from the 7th century. Yet it is not completely 100% proof either, because papyrus was still used even after the introduction of paper in the Middle East. Yet it is still an indication, even if it is not complete proof. And then you have the script style of Arabic found on the manuscript too as an indication of its age. The Arabic script is from a script that you would assume would actually come from the middle or early 7th century, as it looks like a developed form of the rudimentary Hijazi script and is kind of similar to later Kufic script as well when it comes to Arabic. So it fits as a type of script coming from the time period of the stated dates on the manuscript. The only thing with the script that is a bit unusual is that you actually can notice diacritical dots on the letters of Shin, Zai, Dal, Kha and Jim and Nun that are visible. Typically, early Arabic texts lack these diacritics in order to distinguish these letters from other letters, though they are beginning to appear in the middle of the 7th century. And you also have the fact that during later periods, you actually have people adding these diacritics to older manuscripts as a form of post-editing, because these diacritics later got standardized and became an obligatory part of how you wrote Arabic. Yet the presence of diacritics is not always an indicator of age, of this being not from the 7th century, but the absence of diacritics, which this manuscript does not have fully, but the diacritics are certainly absent partially on it, is an indication of this manuscript coming from the 7th century. Then you also have the fact that Ibn Hadid is spelled as Ibn Hadidu in the manuscript, with a long wow, oo sound at the end. And this is actually typical for very old dialectical Arabic. And a lot of Arabic stone inscriptions from the early 7th century and even earlier do have names where a wow sound is present at the end. But in later versions of those names, the wow has been removed. And this manuscript still having this feature in the text indicates that it is actually an older text, because this disappeared after the 7th century. So by that feature, it is probably a 7th century text. And lastly, we have the factor that I don't see anything within this manuscript that indicates that this manuscript is some sort of forgery that was made later than the dates that are stated on it. I don't actually see anything in this manuscript that indicates a reason for having forged a manuscript like this. It does not include large propagandistic elements, and it is rather mundane and just transactional in its format and content. Add to this also the carbon dating, and it becomes pretty certain that this manuscript actually is from the time it states it is. And thus what we have with this manuscript is a very early source regarding the Arab Islamic conquest of Egypt. And I hope you liked me talking about this source. And I hope you have questions and comments for me in the comment section. Write them in the comment section and I will try to respond to you as quickly as possible.
Please do subscribe, as it would help the channel spread awareness about the humanities.
اشتركوا بالقناة من فضلكم.